Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the launch of the ETI GESI Self-Assessment Framework. In our conversation this afternoon, we're going to be talking about the journey towards creating this innovative addition to the Education Researchers Toolkit. First, a little bit of background about ETI. Empowering Teachers Initiative is a research for development program jointly implemented by FitEd and SUMA with funding from the International Development Research Centre, IDRC, in Canada. ETI's objective is to improve teachers' practices through improving equity, quality, and efficiency in teacher professional development, TPD, systems across contexts of the Global South. There are multiple work streams around the ETI programme, including 10 research inquiries, all responding to our general research question. This focuses on how and in what contexts different adaptations and innovations in TPD systems can empower all teachers as professionals to improve their practice. And then really critically for ETI, how can these adaptations and innovations be implemented at scale? But the focus of our webinar today is our new ETI Gender and Social Inclusion, GESI, Self-Assessment Framework, an open tool for researchers. We're delighted to have with us a number of colleagues from ETI today. First of all, we will hear from Victoria Tinio, co-leader of ETI, followed by an introduction to the self-assessment framework from Ingrid Lynch, lead author of the framework. We'll follow this with a panel discussion with researchers from 3 of our country projects, India, Argentina, and Tanzania. And there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, give comments to Ingrid and the panel before we close with some reflections from one of our esteemed reviewers, Professor Eunice Kamara from Moi University. Throughout the webinar, we encourage you to post your questions and comments in the chat. But first of all, let's go to Vicky for an introduction to the journey and the rationale of the GESI self-assessment framework from ETI. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you, Frida. And hello, everyone. Good day and good evening to all of those joining us at the launch of our self-assessment framework. As the co-program manager of ETI with Dante Castillo of SUMA, who's here with us as well, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of the ETI GESI self-assessment framework. As Frida said, a tool that we hope offers both clarity and practical support to researchers and other practitioners for something we all know is important, but not always easy to do well: integrating gender equality and social inclusion considerations meaningfully throughout the research process. As we know too often, considering GESI is reduced to ticking boxes or disaggregating data by sex. So how do we dig deeper to understand how, as researchers, we can reckon with the many intersecting forms of exclusion and marginalization that shape people's lives, while also acknowledging the complexity of context? What's possible or safe in one setting may not be in another. So this tool was born out of a need for something operational. What does it actually mean to move towards GESI transformative research, especially in teacher education and large-scale professional development systems? What do we have to do as researchers step by step? Our ETI country research lead, Frida, proposed that we work with our ETI research teams to develop and field test a self-assessment framework. And so here we are. Many thanks and congratulations to our 11 country teams from Argentina, India, Lebanon, Malaysia, Mexico, Pakistan, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Vietnam, and Zambia, without whom we wouldn't have this framework. Thanks, of course, to Frida for her vision and leadership, to our expert reviewers, one of whom Eunice will be hearing from later, And a special thanks to Ingrid Lynch, our GESI expert, who led the collaborative development of the framework with our research teams, facilitated deep conversations with them, and served as the lead writer. She will be presenting the framework next. To conclude, I believe this tool is not just a useful resource, but a valuable contribution to the broader GESI literature as well. One that hopefully will be helpful to researchers navigating complex realities on the ground. Thank you, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Vicky, for that introduction. And now I'd like to invite Ingrid to explain to us what the framework comprises of and how it might be used. Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you very much. And just confirming that you can see my slides.
Yes, thank you, Ingrid.
Great. So I'm going to just pick up right where Vicky left off. Hello, everyone. And I will speak briefly about the purpose of the framework, and then dive into a little bit more detail about how it was developed and look at some snapshots of its core components to give you a sense of what the tool is like and how, as Vicky said, it really is operationalizing GESI integration. At its heart, the tool is a practical, interactive tool. It's not a blueprint, it's not a checklist. It's designed to support research teams in systematically reflecting on how GESI is, or perhaps at a certain point in their process, is not yet integrated across their work. It encourages critical thinking about the broader purposes of one's research, so helping guide some challenging questions such as who benefits from the research, what structures might the research be reinforcing or challenging, and what is the contribution of the research to equity in education. The tool also helps teams identify priorities for strengthening equity across all stages of the research cycle. And because it's a formative tool, it's not just useful for ongoing research projects, it's also really valuable for shaping new proposals. And then finally, it's designed to support peer learning and exchange. It creates space for teams to share insights, to reflect on challenges, and learn from one another as they deepen their GESI practice. I think most importantly, we developed the tool keeping in mind that we want to meet research teams where they are and support learning over time rather than prescribing a set of fixed generic steps. Vicky said that we had a collaborative approach to developing the framework. So the tool really wasn't something that was created in isolation or informed only by theory. It emerged through that participatory co-development process, and we really aimed to ground it in the experiences of researchers across the Global South. We began with a series of online consultation workshops where researchers from 13 countries shared their insights on GESI within their particular settings. And these contributions helped us to shape the tool's structure and start thinking about the kinds of reflection questions we wanted to include. And definitely also make sure that the tool had a very practical focus. Next, we worked with the ETI research teams to pilot the draft version. They tested it in real time within their projects and provided really thoughtful feedback on what worked, what was missing, which components were perhaps really challenging to complete. And this was also an opportunity for us to really enrich the framework with some of the innovative approaches that teams were developing. They'll share a little bit more later in the the panel discussion, and we were able to draw in those practices into the tool, which was actually a really important part of the process. And then finally, we engaged with an external review group. We reached out to GESI and education experts who helped us strengthen the tool's rigor, and we really received excellent guidance from that team on further strengthening specifically the action orientation of the questions, and also deepening the extent to which the framework can prompt that critical reflection on the contribution that research makes to social justice goals more broadly. And the result is a framework that is grounded in practice and informed also by expertise. So it really is something that reflects the realities of conducting research with teachers in very diverse settings. Here you can see an overview of the overall structure of the framework. You can see it's built around a simplified version of the research cycle, not because research is ever tidy or linear, but because we wanted to really structure it in a way that supports systematic reflection across all parts of a project in a way that is accessible, where someone can really go into a particular stage when that is where their attention is focused and be able to engage with the reflection questions in that stage. For each of these 6 stages, the respective sections have a short overview of what the main focus would be in that stage in terms of conducting GESI responsive research. The section has targeted reflection questions and some tools and resources that users are pointed to, and then also those real-world examples from ETI research teams that they were able to share during that co-development process. And of course, because stakeholder engagement is really central to research with teachers and research in education systems generally, the cycle has stakeholder engagement integrated throughout, but then we also have some dedicated reflection questions related to that in stage 4 and also stage 6. And then finally, because many projects in teacher, sort of community engaged teacher research and education research is often participatory, the stages do often overlap or repeat, and the framework makes space for that. So we indicate particular points where it is useful to revisit certain sections of the tool and certain questions in the tool as your understanding of equity, inclusion, marginalization deepens as you engage more and more in your project setting. Let's take a quick look at stage 1 to get a sense of how each section of the framework is structured. This stage opens with an overview of what it means to bring a GESI lens into the very earliest phases of a research project. The key focus in that section is on grounding the research in its broader sociocultural, political, and historical context. That section also invites teams to examine how intersecting norms, power relations, structural factors shape teacher marginalization and inequality, including the different forces that perhaps facilitate or constrain teachers' power and autonomy in their communities and also in their education system. The reflection questions in that section prompt thinking around the research problem itself. So the context analysis is really pulled through into how the project is approaching the research problem. So it asks questions such as how broader power dynamics shape the issue that you're studying, and what structural drivers of inequality need to be surfaced and interrogated in your project potentially. We include there two practical and complementary tools that can support context analysis. The first is a structured approach to conducting a GESI context analysis based on different GESI domains, quite a well-known approach that we draw on literature there. And then we also include an intersectionality wheel. Yeah, there you can see it on the right. So there's an appendix with guidance on how one could draw on an intersectionality wheel. And those tools are two of many that are available, but it provides a good starting point for taking that general contextual awareness through to a more systematic intersectional analysis. Okay, so I think I might have skipped. No, there's still the reflection questions. Okay, so here are two sample reflection questions. I've mentioned a few times that that is in each stage. And if you look at those two, you can see that they are really phrased to emphasize practical action and prompt deep reflection on the exact way in which you could operationalize the particular issue. So the first one, how will you continue deepening your understanding of marginalization in your project context? So that is really to highlight that this is ongoing, right? So you might have done your context analysis, but this is going to be an ongoing engagement. So that could be through reviewing literature from diverse sources, from by consulting with local GESI-informed organizations, involving teacher groups or representatives from organizations in a reference or a steering committee. So offering some concrete suggestions and then also having space there for people to reflect on what would be appropriate and feasible within their project. The second one is also an example of one that is flagged in the framework as particularly useful to return to periodically. How, if at all, has your definition of GESI evolved as the project has progressed? And this was really based on a lot of feedback from ETI teams that they were just constantly gaining more and more insight into what marginalization means in their particular research setting. I mentioned that each section also showcases some of the practical strategies that teams used when they were field testing the tool and when they were giving input based on some of their experiences for refining the framework. So this is just one example. We'll hear more later in the panel discussion, but this is from the ETI team in Rwanda. And this is these notes I think are really helpful to like I said, make the questions more, I suppose, make them less daunting in a way, because you can start seeing how teams engaged with it and start, I think, sometimes gaining a bit of inspiration and also just a bit of confidence, which can be really important. So in this field note, the team's context analysis uncovered some really important insights around language diversity in border schools and also the resource gaps that exist in schools in remote areas for teachers with disabilities. And that led them to reassess the categories that they were going to be using for how schools are categorized by the Ministry of Education in the country. So the initial categories are classifications of rural, peri-urban, and urban schools, and the teams expanded that to include remote schools and border schools. So that was an important shift for the team to make sure that they are not going to overlook certain barriers to fully participating and benefiting from teacher professional development. Did I skip forward a bit by accident? There we go. So let's jump ahead to stage 4, stakeholder engagement and data collection processes. This section starts off by acknowledging that every research interaction is shaped by power dynamics. And being power aware means deliberately designing activities so that all voices can be heard and that no one is often unintentionally excluded. For example, one of the teams shared that in their setting, teachers from community schools might defer to their counterparts from better resourced government schools because of existing status and power dynamics in that setting. And those dynamics can affect the quality of the overall findings if you, as a researcher, is not attuned to that and engaging with that. And of course, if you are navigating that thoughtfully, you might be able to identify ways in which you can even make the participation process more transformative, again, depending on what's going to be feasible and appropriate in your context. This stage also includes a focus on inclusive data collection and engagement. So building on that awareness of power. This could mean adjusting one's methods to local norms, scheduling data collection activities around gendered time commitments and responsibilities, or perhaps piloting one's tools to surface any accessibility or inclusivity gaps that you might not have anticipated. Finally, this stage also invites us as researchers to look inward. Our backgrounds, our social status, our values, our biases, those are all positionalities that shape the research process too. And the reflection questions highlight ways in which to, perhaps through team debriefings or for the sort of a whole team training approach, including for field researchers that can all support you to work more reflexively and ethically in your setting. Again, we can have a quick look at 2 reflection questions. I think I'm still doing okay for time. So these 2 lift out those really practical considerations for first identifying potential barriers to participation, and then going further to also identify practical strategies that you can take to remove those barriers. And as I mentioned, helping the team reflect on the kind of training that they might need to engage in to ensure that they are able to really navigate the particular factors in their setting, and not approach the research process itself almost with imposed ideas about what they might encounter. Also here we can have a quick look at one of those notes from the field. Sorry. So in this example, the team in Argentina identified 2 key research participation barriers for teachers in mountainous remote areas in their project. And these were limited internet access and professional and household workloads, where many teachers were only free for research activities after completing their school and domestic or household responsibilities. So to take that seriously and really make sure their research is responsive to that, they launched a WhatsApp survey, which they ensured was open for a period that spanned 2 weekends, because teachers typically travel to towns where they would have internet connectivity over weekends. They also adapted their survey for home completion, recognizing that in the evenings, that was, for many teachers, just the most realistic window for them to participate in the research activities. So, I think that is what we mean by giving some practical ideas from the field to just inspire people to see how they can address some of this in sometimes simple but very powerful ways. To wrap up, I'd like to highlight just 4 final thoughts about what we think makes this framework truly distinctive. First, it's grounded in Global South realities. Many equity-focused tools have been developed in the Global North, and this framework draws directly on the experiences of research teams in Southern contexts. So it is really geared towards surfacing local priorities, knowledge systems, and innovative ways of working that could otherwise perhaps be overlooked. It's intentionally accessible. So whether you're just beginning to integrate a gender and equity lens, or you have rich experience in doing so, it also doesn't prescribe a fixed definition of equity or provide a one-size-fits-all roadmap. And this is because it really is designed to support that ongoing reflective process and help cultivate a sense that GESI thinking is not once-off. It's really a practice of collecting, learning, and adjustment over time. And finally, it's open source and freely available for people to tailor. So I think that is really important, because you can add stages, you can add additional reflection questions or adjust them or bring in new examples, and make sure that the framework really works to support equitable research practice in your setting. I'm going to end there and hand back over to Frida. I hope that the snapshot stimulated your curiosity, and we're going to hear a little bit more about the researchers who helped us develop the framework.
Great. Thank you so much, Ingrid. Really super helpful to hear about the different sections within the framework, the prompt reflective questions, the examples from the field, and so on. So I'm delighted now to join Ingrid. We have 3 researchers, 3 colleagues from our ETI research project. We're going to have a conversation about how they have integrated GESI considerations into their research, what's gone well, what's been more challenging, what they've learned, what's been surprising to them. So really warm welcome to Carolina Gamba from the Argentinian project, to Marcia Ibrahim from the project in India, and to Christine Tuchanga from our project in Tanzania. Welcome, colleagues. Just to say, Carolina will be speaking in Spanish. So if you're not a Spanish speaker, please make sure you have the interpretation on. It's at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can have this in English. So welcome, colleagues. I think we agreed that it would be very helpful if you could just start by just giving us a really short overview of what your project is concerned with, the kind of context that you're working in. So I'm going to just go with the order on the screen and ask Carolina if you could just give us a quick snapshot of what research you're undertaking in Argentina around TPD. Thanks, Carolina.
Hola, bueno, muchas gracias. Hola a todos y a todas.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me to be here sharing this panel with my colleagues to share the experiences and the different modes that we have in the different countries about the GESI or the GESI. I am part of the Argentinian team. We led a research project about the models for the TPD in the initial literacy in two provinces of our country, considering different schools and teachers from different contexts, intercultural, bilingual, rural, urban. We have also indigenous teachers. The methodology that we used is composed by different tools, such as surveys, interviews, focus groups that provide different types of data, qualitative and quantitative, for the development of these models that we analyzed in all the stages. We have been using the framework that is provided by the GESI, that, as Ingrid mentioned, is dynamic and requires feedback with the analysis context, the production of different instruments, the analysis of data. In relation to what I just wanted to mention is mainly related to the analysis context. We were interested from the team to tell you two things that called our attention and that are really representative about the dynamic approach of the GESI focus. The initial context analysis, we set our focus that in Argentina, the teachers are mainly women. And as a hypothesis, we said that as women are the ones that are in charge of looking after children, this could bring inequities in the probability of these women for their teachers' development. And when we show this data, the context in these teachers, the gap between men and women that look after in relation to the time of care that other people provide is not that big as it is for the rest of the society. So we realize that the gap is smaller than the one that we consider at the beginning. And the GESI focus told us or helped us to see that we see this inequality that is still there, but we see some transformations in terms of the roles, the gender mandates, the power dynamics in relation to the caring activities. That was something that this type of GESI focus allows us to see, this type of transformation. And the second part, that was a big challenge, that was to think about adequate questions and sensitive questions to capture or to receive information from the teachers with disabilities for an intersectional analysis. So this led the team to look for information, contact different organizations, think how to build these questions that we hadn't considered at the beginning. So the invitation of the tool from the GESI tool was such an interesting question, because the data showed us results that we never expected, and this leads us to think about new dimension of analysis that bring new things for our research.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Really interesting to hear about how your perceptions were challenged, both around gender and concerning teachers and also teachers with disabilities. Thank you. So maybe moving on to Christine, who's working in a very different context in Tanzania. Christine, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the project, and maybe, I know you've done a lot of research with teachers with disabilities, so perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how you approach the kind of ethical issues around that. Thanks, Christine.
Sure, thank you, Frida. It's wonderful to be a part of this panel and discussion. I'm Christine Chachage from EdTech Hub, from the research team in Tanzania. Our ETI project is assessing the scale up of a technology-supported, government-led teacher professional development program in Tanzania. We're considering issues of equity, agency, and adaptation in the context of rural primary schools. In this initiative, where the main modality of TPD is school-based communities of learning. And it's a mixed method study. We're using participatory activities in focus groups and interviews with teachers, school leaders, and a range of stakeholders at each level of the education system, as well as teacher surveys and observation of lessons and communities of learning. Yes, we've had a particular focus on teachers with disabilities and chronic illnesses. And one of the ethical challenges actually that has arisen is how to describe teachers while respecting their own preferred identities. For example, we had a case where the official school data and members of the school community even labeled the teacher as hearing impaired. And there were some great examples of accommodations by the school and the staff put in place to support this teacher, both in the classroom and in peer facilitating communities of learning. Yet this teacher herself on our survey and in conversation does not identify as a teacher with disabilities. So as a research team, we want to highlight the supportive practices of the school, but we also want to respect the teacher's own identity and be very careful of how we kind of present that teacher or what kind of labels that we're using in the process. It has raised really interesting discussions even amongst our research team and highlighting the complexities, I think, of teacher identity.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing that example from your research. Maybe we could just now move to Marcia. Marcia, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your research in southern India. And I think you too have been kind of really encountering issues of teacher identity and how teachers are sort of internalizing marginalization. So perhaps you could say a little bit about that. Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you so much. It's really nice to be a part of this discussion. I work at IT for Change. It's based in Bangalore, India. Our research is focusing on looking at the scalability of a TPD program running in the state of Karnataka. This primarily involves focusing on teachers, language teachers from minority language schools. And so they teach languages like Urdu, Tamil, and Telugu, which are the non-dominant languages. The dominant languages are English and Kannada. The research looks at key factors that enhance equity, quality, and efficiency in the TPD system, while also looking at the role of communities of practice amongst teachers to actually support teacher agency and also their ongoing professional development. So to connect to what Christine was saying, I think that teacher identity has been a big question. In our research, we went in thinking about the teachers' marginalization because of the fact that they come from schools that are minority language schools. They also most of the teachers come from communities that are a religious minority, and so I think. Looking at how the teachers identify themselves versus how we look at them was very important for us to recognize. The wheel of power and privilege that Ingrid was, talking about earlier really helped us to analyze why teachers are saying the things that they are saying. Maybe, they have this kind of marginalization that is internalized. And so we kind of adapted that wheel at two levels. There was an adapted Indian version that was made by the Listeners Collective. And then we made our own version for our context. Because even within India, there's so much diversity and it has to be context specific. So for instance, when we were conducting discussions with teachers, we realized that it was very difficult for them to speak about their lived experiences of marginalization, and they would often project that everything is okay, or they thought that there were certain expected answers that they had to give us. And so we kind of changed our approach in the second round of data generation, in which instead of using a guide or a set of questions and follow-up prompts, we adapted an audio material which was about gender-based discrimination faced by adolescent girls. So we translated that into their own language, which is Urdu, and then used that as an entry point for them to talk about, what young girls might be going through. And then that made it easier for them to share deeper insights into their own lived experience.
Thank you, Marcia. And I really want to pick up on that point that you made there about the second time you went back, you kind of observed what some of the GESI issues were, the marginalization, and then you adapted it going back. And I know, Christine, you spoke about that the other day to us, so maybe you could share a little bit about how you worked iteratively in adapting your research tools for different groups of teachers. Thanks.
Sure, I think that the GESI framework has been particularly useful in this iterative process of moving back and forth from the data collection and then collecting more data. For instance, there were issues which arose maybe as a comment or as just a data point in the surveys in round one. For example, how chronic illnesses might be impacting teachers' participation in professional development, I remember there was a comment from one participant about female teachers, quote, isolating themselves during communities of learning related to technology. And because we had the chance to go back into the schools again and do more qualitative data collection in a second round because of our iterative design of the process, we were able to really dig into those issues a bit more and gain more participant perspectives and from many different schools, not just from the one participant who might have made a comment in the first round, I think. So it really enriched the data that we are able to gather by having this iterative process, as well as having the framework to remind us with the reflection questions to come back to, and that thinking of that continuum of what would be responsive actions, what might possibly even be a transformative action or question or recommendation in this situation or in this context.
Thanks. And I think that issue of kind of thinking about what are the most appropriate issues as you return to the field and then analyze your data in a continuation of the cycle is really important. Coming back to you, Carolina, I think earlier when we were preparing for this, you talked a little bit about some issues around Indigenous teachers and some ethical dilemmas. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what those were and how you moved forward with those.
Bueno, también nos llevó
So we were in this study, like space instance, to see how to create these questions in relation to being part of an indigenous community. And it's interesting to see that we get in the data that creates a challenge in ethical terms. We see a marginalization of indigenous teachers. There are differences in the powers dynamic between teachers that are indigenous and non-indigenous, but also we see that indigenous women are the ones that have been relegated or delayed in the systems of teachers where the indigenous people choose their teachers, and most of them are men. So we are in this ethical challenge of thinking or creating strategies so we can face these inequalities that create or that are created because indigenous teachers are not registered in the teachers classification systems, but also respecting their own dynamics from the different communities where they are the ones that choose their own teachers. How to sort these difficulties out? How do we respect their patterns, their own dynamics, but also tackling these things that create inequalities that are more like relevant to women or that are more related to women.
Thank you. Absolutely. And that's moving towards GESI transformative research. So we've talked quite a bit about the issues in the field and sense. Maybe I'd like now to move to just thinking about our identities as researchers and how we form research teams and how we work in an equitable way in those research teams, how we have a research environment that encourages everybody to contribute. So I'll start this time with Marcia. You can tell us a little bit about your own journey here on working in a more equitable fashion with this group of teachers. Thanks, Marcia.
Thanks for that. I think the way that we've been thinking about our own research team has changed so much across this project. We may have made certain assumptions in the beginning about how our own identity as researchers was aligned with the identity of the teachers, perhaps, or that it would help us to relate to them. But one thing that we realized was, for example, that communicating and involving other stakeholders. You may think that your primary participants are the teachers, but to involve all the other stakeholders to understand the entire system better was something that really helped us. In our case, this meant working very closely with the TPD team that is collaborating with the government to carry out this entire TPD program. And also government officials and, the middle level cluster, we call them the cluster resource persons. And so the people who work very closely with the teachers and trying to get their views and their voices heard in, the data that we generate, and then in the analysis of that data as well, I think it becomes really important.
Thank you. Christine, and some reflections from your work in Tanzania and how I know in the team you've taken a lot of actions to kind of share out different tasks and so on. Perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about those. Thanks.
Sure. Maybe this brings another perspective in terms of the power dynamics and opportunities within a research team. Our team is quite large and includes both junior and senior researchers and people located in different institutions and parts of the world. So we've tried to be quite mindful of the opportunities within our team. For example, we decided to rotate roles, even roles such as, regional coordination and different responsibilities in engaging with participants and organizing things, and ensuring that everyone has a chance to play those roles, so that everyone has an opportunity to kind of experience the leadership positions. And even after data collection, we ask all team members to contribute to debriefs on preliminary and emerging findings after each round of data collection. And we try to also, equitably share the opportunities for dissemination and even, conferences and presentations, so that junior researchers can also experience the full process and not only the data collection stage.
Thanks. Lots of brilliant ideas there. I know some of them are noted in the framework. Thanks, Christine. Carolina, any reflections from you on how the team might have shifted, your own thoughts about working with GESI as you've moved through the project? Thanks.
También, la verdad que es una herramienta.
Absolutely. It's a very powerful tool to think intersectionally on all the data that you are collecting. And the challenge that we found in our team is related to the reception of these data at the moment of sharing this with the decision makers, with the school directors, with the supervisors, because we realized that some data that for us are very rich in terms that they detect like preferences, self-perceptions, different self-perceptions between men and women who are teachers. This thing that Christine mentioned about the self-perception for the use and the knowledge of technologies, where we also observe in Argentina that women are a little bit delayed in comparison with the male peers. This in turn perceptions, preferences in terms of the modalities of the TPD and the topics that are interesting for each one of them. These differences are not taken as so important data by those who make decisions, but they don't care much about that data. So we wonder if we are facing this challenge of how to convey this focus and this GESI approach for those that make decisions, for the supervisor teams that are the ones that develop the different teachers' professional devices for their training.
Thanks, Carolina. Thanks. We are open now to questions. I see we have one question in the chat about how to access the framework. If you just wait until the end of the webinar, in a very few minutes, we're going to be putting up a slide with a QR code which links to it. And then there will be information on the ETI website to download the tool. At the moment, the tool is in English, a global version of the tool, but as Ingrid has emphasized, this is an open tool. It's licensed under a Creative Commons license. So we really encourage people to take it and adapt it for their own context. Thanks. I just see a comment in the chat from our colleague in Zambia, John, saying the framework gives us an opportunity to continue reflecting and consideration for inclusion throughout the research process. So before we move just to our final words of reflection from Professor Yunus, I wondered if any of the panelists would like to share final thoughts, and Ingrid, if there's anything final you would like to share with us after that very, very rich discussion. Perhaps Ingrid first, anything you'd like to share? Thanks.
Sure. I will just share a very short comment, which is that as I'm listening to the panelists' reflections, I'm really struck by how your actions really improve the quality of your data. I think sometimes it feels like including a GESI lens is something extra, something onerous, and not necessarily valued for that methodological benefit, which is that you will end up with better research. So it was really great to just hear your different comments on how that was the case in your respective projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Carolina, any final thoughts?
Comparto con Ingrid.
I share with Ingrid what she has just said, that this enriches not only the construction or the building of the tools, the analysis of the data, because we have this transactional view that is also receiving feedback in all times, in all the stages of research, and also that in spite of the diversity of context, in this conversation, we see common points. I think that's also interesting to see. This framework allows us to detect some continuities. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it allows us to detect inequalities, but also transformation process. I think that enriches all the process.
Thank you. Great point, actually, about the way in which we've seen the commonalities across the discussion today. Thanks. Christine, any final thoughts to share with the audience? Thanks.
Thank you. And I appreciate the points that Ingrid and Carolina have raised. And maybe just to add on to that is that I think one thing I really appreciate is that it's a framework focused particularly on doing research with teachers, because I think one thing that we've noticed in what our findings and what's coming out is that many of the issues and the causes of the issues that we're finding in relation to inequality are not so different, or there are some parallels with the issues for students, based, for girls' education, for students perhaps with disabilities. And yet most interventions, in my experience, I think certainly in Tanzania, but I think elsewhere, policies and interventions often focus on inclusion for students and kind of forget the inclusion of teachers. So I really appreciate that the framework has that focus on teachers as well.
Great point. We found that when we were really starting this process, so little on equity for teachers. Marcia, a final sentence or two? Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. This has been a really enriching discussion. And I think I just wanted to highlight that from my own context. Very often, in my experience, researchers look at gender and they look at equity and inclusion, but this kind of brings all of that together. And that's what I've loved the most about this process. And I look forward to continuing, as we all have shared, that it doesn't stop with, just looking at it once. I mean, you keep coming back to these questions and reflecting, and, even the points raised about the research team itself and how we can be conscious about what's going on within the team is something that's really interesting to look into.
Thank you. Yes, I think we're all on a journey and moving towards this aspiration of being gender and social inclusive, transformative. So to finish today, I'd really like to welcome Professor Eunice Kamara from Moi University in Kenya, who did a fantastic job for us on critically reviewing the framework. As Ingrid said, we took on board many of her comments. So Eunice, I'd like to invite you to share some reflections on the framework or what you've heard today from a fellow researchers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Frida. First, I have to express my gratitude for you being involved in this process, not just the reviewing bit, but even involvement in this webinar, because it strengthened my capacity in very many ways as a teacher and also as a researcher. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And I must also take this opportunity to say that I found the tool quite well done in both content and approach, particularly in the approach, the ideas, the spirit. I could feel the spirit around within which the tool is created. And I can particularly highlight the issue of reflection, which is extremely important. I think it's one of the least used methods of appealing to people to do the right thing or to do good, and it underscores the fact that ethics is not law. So you cannot really give people prescriptions, do this, don't do this, do this, It's more about reflecting about who you are and how who you are is affecting what you're doing and what it is, what the implications are and how you can therefore do good, remaining who you are and respecting who others are. One of the things I could mention here, which has come up quite a bit in the various presentations, including the first presentation that was telling us, giving us more insights on the GESI toolkit, is the importance of context. Context matters. What is applicable in one area may not be applicable in another area. What is applicable today may not be applicable tomorrow, because human life is messy. It is complex. Complex because there are multiple identities. Every person has multiple identities, and there are different spaces, there are different times, and different spaces and different times have impact on identities. So we are always in a situation where we are negotiating our identity depending on our context, which is very much about time, about space, and so on and so forth. And therefore, I really would like to appreciate this tool because it seems to consider these issues, to put a lot of emphasis on the issues of context, and say that it has great potential for impact. There's great potential for impact in this work. And one of the issues that come to my mind, and one we discussed with Frida in the past in the context of this work, is the way situations change. I was telling her that I'm in a board in North America, the Social Science Research Council, which funds research in Africa, about Africa. And one of our keystones, one of our cornerstones was gender and inclusion. And we explicitly put it that way in our policy document. But with the current geopolitical environment, we have had to revise that. We know what we want. We are clear we still want to be inclusive. We still want to be sensitive to gender and to people's identities, but we can no longer express it that way. Not because the funds are coming from USAID or from any of the organizations that have been withdrawn, but because we got to go on. We got to go on with the work we do. Otherwise, we don't want to risk being shut down or shut up. Because either of them could happen in the current context. So we have to be sensitive of context. And this is what I like very much about the GESI toolkit. I'll be using it myself to self-reflect, to self-critique, and to draw inspirations from it. So I really would like to thank you all for the great work that you're doing and to wish you a great, real great impact from this GESI tool. Wishing you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for those really thoughtful remarks. And I think it's really good for us to be reminded of the current geopolitical context, where we can feel that perhaps some of this work is a little bit under threat, perhaps in a way in which we've been doing it over the last few years. But as you say, it's really important for us to be continuing it, but we maybe talk about it a little differently. I really liked your point about continually negotiating identities. So thank you very much. Huge thanks to our panelists for stepping up and sharing experiences from their projects. That was a really valuable, wonderful discussion. And a very big thanks to Ingrid for talking about the framework. So hopefully now we will have a slide which will give you a QR code to download the framework. And then it also should be available on the ETI website. So great, here we go to check the framework. As you heard, there's a full framework with lots of beautiful photographs from our projects and reflections and field notes and so on. And then there's also a much shorter version, a worksheet, which you can download and scribble responses in and share them around the team and so on. So thank you very much to everyone today. We really hope that people use the framework, have a look at it, adapt it, and tell us what you're doing with it. We would love to kind of develop it further and include more examples. Thank you very much. And could I please just ask my panelists to stay on for a minute so we can do a photograph. But thank you very much to everyone else who's joined us today.